Hello, everyone. Nice to be with you once more. My name is Richard Westwood from St Anne's Church in Chasetown, and I'm delighted to be joined by my friend and colleague, Lindsay Hall, who's part of the wider team of support from Lichfield Diocese, fulfilling a range of roles, less so in recent months. But Lindsay, it's great to have you with us again. Thank you.
Great to be part of this again, Richard.
So we met a good while ago at the start of our Big Bible Questions series, and we started to look at how we start the process off. And now we're at this final session, which we've called, quite ridiculously, what is the overarching storyline of the Bible? And I know we've given ourselves a ridiculously big task there, so I apologize to you and to myself that we've actually given this question, but it's also one that's a tantalizing prospect, because anyone who spent any time in the Bible realizes that it is just an ocean to swim in, you know. So before we sort of dig in a little bit, are there any kind of observations you want to sort of give us, just to sort of start us in the right direction, do you think?
I think, it is a pretty impossible question, really. And one of the things that I think perhaps it's useful to remind ourselves of is that the Bible isn't really one cohesive book. Most of us will have a Bible, which is all of the books of the Bible bound in one volume. And so we think of it as kind of one book. But it's only really for the last 400 or 500 years that anyone would have had anything that looked like that at all. Before that, it would have been lots of separate kind of texts and manuscripts and scrolls even before that. And of course, that would have made it much clearer then that what you're dealing with is more like a library of books in a way. It's a collection of different books which are gathered from over a very long time period. So the kind of writings of the Bible probably cover something like 1600 years, possibly even a bit more. I mean, even the New Testament, the kind of second section of the Bible, it covers, at least 2 or 3 generations over which that was written. So sort of trying to look for it as one story with a beginning, a middle and an end doesn't quite work, even though it does have a really important beginning, lots in the middle and a really significant end for us. So I think kind of saying what is it we're dealing with here is probably quite helpful for us. And just thinking about that as a set of books, a collection of God's story from over a long kind of time period.
Okay. I know when I was a younger Christian, there was a sort of a poster that I came across, and it was basically trying to say, if you want to use the body well, follow the maker's instructions. And there was a picture of the Bible as though it were a kind of a user's manual, as you would have for a computer or a washing machine. That the Bible would then you could find out what to do if. And obviously there are some instructions, there are helpful guidelines, but if we use it just like that, we've kind of done exactly the opposite of what you're reminding us of there, that it's not supposed to be read in that sort of programmatic way, I don't think, in a sort of a user's manual. It's much more vital almost.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's useful for us, isn't it? Because what it means is in this conversation, we can't necessarily get to one really tidy answer about this is the shape of the Bible. That's it. There's nothing else to say. Yeah. What we can do is say, as I've journeyed with the Bible, it's begun to look like this to me, and invite other people to kind of reflect on what it looks like to them. But it is a complex set of texts. And even though they are, they all do come together, and that's important, I think it would be a shame to try and make it too neat and tidy an answer, because I think we'd end up missing some of the stuff that's there.
Yeah, I think you're right. Actually, just coming on to that, I'd like to show a picture, if that's okay, which I think is quite a good illustration of the sort of challenge we face when we try and look at what the Bible's about. And hopefully this is going to work. I'm sharing my screen now. And as you can see here, this is a picture of Donald Duck. I hope you can see it. Can you see that, Lindsay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm hoping that everyone else who watches the video will be able to see it as well. It's everyone who's ever known Donald Duck will see it is Donald Duck. But if I try and zoom in, you can actually see that the big picture.
Oh, yeah.
The big picture of Donald Duck is made up of many, many other smaller pictures of Donald Duck.
Oh, wow.
And if these sort of mosaic pictures are quite common now, but it's a little illustration, I think, there of the kind of challenge that the Bible has, that we want to know the big picture, but actually it's made up of lots of little pictures, all of which tell their own slightly separate story, but fit into and point to God's huge and wonderful purposes. And therefore, actually knowing the little stories are important. It's not that you can say, well, that doesn't matter, or this bit doesn't matter, because this is the most important bit. All of them thread together to make a more complete whole picture. And of course, you only get the whole picture after you've read a lot of the little stories. And for me, I think one of those questions to say, well, how do we get the overarching storyline of the Bible, such as it may be? It is about how we learn together from each other. And we never think we've reached a point where we say, right, I've got it. That's the end. Because there will always be new aspects, new points to have unfolded to us, a fuller and better picture, I guess. A bit like if you just focused on Donald Duck's wing there and saw 5 or 6 of the little pictures, then you may not have actually got an idea of which is correct of what the picture was all about. So I wonder whether it's worth us taking a little bit of time now to have a look at a couple of instances that I think might help us. I mean, we talked a little bit in that picture analogy there that, you know, even if I were to bury myself in the Bible for, you know, several years, I would miss out on a lot of the stories if I wasn't sharing in discussion with people who've also been doing the same thing. We learn well when we learn together, I think. So there's lots that goes with that. So I'm going to offer a couple of thoughts now from the Old Testament. And I know that, that Lindsay, you're going to offer some from the New in a moment too. But the story that emerges from the Old Testament, and particularly the book of Genesis, is of God, the wonderful, powerful, loving creator, creating the universe and humanity in loving freedom. God giving humanity a massive amount of freedom, of choice, and making humanity in love to give them that freedom. And then humanity finding ways in so many different ways of, to borrow a phrase, kind of crashing the car, doing the things that God says don't do, they do. And the things that God says do, they don't. And then all sorts of instances. Obviously, there's the early parts of Genesis where we see this most prominently. But throughout the book of Genesis and echoed through the rest of the Old Testament, we see this instance of God giving direction, humanity often choosing the wrong way, which leads to bad consequences. And then God finding a way to try and make those consequences less bad than they could be. And there's a lovely bit for me, which is so significant at the end of the Joseph story, towards the end of Genesis, where Joseph has been met by his brothers. They've discovered who each other is, and of course they're scared witless that Joseph's going to take it out on them now. And Joseph, remarkably, despite how poorly he's been treated, and despite how foolish he's been for being so full of himself, says in Genesis 50:20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, for the saving of many lives." And I think that is a beautiful summary of the Joseph story, but it's also part of a shape of what we see emerging through the Old Testament, where there's places where God finds a way to turn bad inside out and bring some good out of it. And that's a beautiful picture, I think, because it means that God is always looking to stop things being wasted, but find ways to heal and restore. Excuse me.
That's so true, isn't it? And we sort of start off with this sense that God invites us into relationship, into God's life, into being part of the creation, part of the kingdom. We sort of understand it as Christians, and that invitation, we're sort of given the invitation. We go to a different party instead, and we just get a new invitation. You know, it's not sort of like, well, you didn't come, you messed that up. That's it, God's done with you. And sometimes God gets frustrated with the people, doesn't he? Like, you sort of think that's absolutely understandable. But nevertheless, there's always then God sort of just is still holding that hand out, still offering that invitation to be part of God's life. And like, really, if you look through both testaments, I think you just see that over and over again, don't you? That God won't be thwarted by however sort of rubbish we are at responding.
There's so many parts in the Old Testament that point to, and the New, which I know we'll hear in a minute, but I'm sorry to bark like this. Lovely bit in the end of Hosea 11, where God's, through Hosea, trying to speak to God's people. And he says, how can I give you up? How can I hand you over? How can I treat you so like Admah, like Zeboim? My heart is changed within me, and my compassion is aroused. I will not carry out my fierce anger. I will turn, nor will I turn and devastate. For I am God and not human, the Holy One among you. I will not come in wrath. And it's this sense of God absorbing into God's own self the pain and the consequences of humanity's fault. And that speaks to me of a God of huge love, compassion, and energy, and being nimble enough to cope with the ways that we screw things up, you know. And that's both beautiful and stunning. Because it kind of says, even though I've made so many mistakes in my life, yet God hasn't given up on me, doesn't give up on us. We could spend longer in the Old Testament, but can you move us on to some of the New Testament places?
Well, I think you get that same theme, don't you? And particularly in the Gospels, what you have are lots of different encounters of Jesus with individual people. So rather than it being kind of God and the people of Israel, or, you know, God and a whole kind of community or tribe, you get, I think, the same story told between Jesus and an individual. So you might think of Zacchaeus. You might well know a song about Zacchaeus being a very little man. And he was kind of despised in his community, you know, a tax collector. He'd wronged most of the people. And yet he had this sense of, he must have known he was unpopular. He must have known he'd done wrong by people. He must have sort of thought, I'm not somebody who is going to be front of the queue of people Jesus wants to encounter, but he wanted to see him. And so the story is that he climbs the tree and Jesus spots him. And Zacchaeus's life is absolutely turned around from that encounter. So Jesus tells Zacchaeus that he's going to his house for tea, which is like a brilliant way of sort of drawing somebody in, isn't it? Like, it's not even that Zacchaeus can go to Jesus's. Jesus is taking Zacchaeus' hospitality. So everything is like immediately sort of turned on its head from where you'd expect that story to go. Like, you'd expect Zacchaeus to at least get a lecture, wouldn't you, about kind of all the ways in which he failed, and, like, you know, pointing to all the people he'd let down or whatever. But that's the outcome. So what we then hear, and it's a really short little passage of this encounter, but is that then Zacchaeus repays and twofold and fourfold all the people that he's cheated, and suddenly his whole life is kind of turned around. He didn't need to do that first. He didn't need to have done that for Jesus to say, okay, Zacchaeus, I'm coming to your house for tea. Jesus found him up the tree, went to his house, and Zacchaeus' life was changed. And I think that pattern is the same. It's God's initiative all the time.
And it's so beautiful, isn't it? I mean, so many instances where you think Jesus has been taken by surprise by someone comes across to him who he's, on the face of it, he's not expecting to see. But there is always a compassionate response, and this nimbleness of God to respond well to human need and suffering and struggle. And I love the bit at the start of Mark's Gospel where Jesus is met by somebody who is suffering from leprosy. Well, the face of it, you think, well, what happened there? How did well, it says that Jesus is walking near to or into leper colonies. What does that say about the sort of God who Jesus is? And then Jesus touches the man before he heals him. He's massive, you know, and we don't know whether the man would have actually been able to feel the touch, given that he had leprosy. But certainly it would have been the first time that anyone had reached out to physically touch, and that sense of that initiative of God, it, like you say, it's thread through all the different mini encounters that we see of Jesus in the New Testament, isn't it? Have you got any more? Go on.
Well, I mean, when you were saying that, I was just thinking about the woman who's we're told has been suffering with hemorrhages for is it 13 years, and she's the one who touches Jesus in the middle of a crowd, and of course that's in Mark as well as I think in Matthew and Luke as well. But Mark tells it with quite a lot of tension. So, of course, a woman who is suffering from that particular condition shouldn't be in the middle of a crowd of people, because she'll make them all unclean if she touches them accidentally. And she touches the hem of Jesus's cloak. And I love to sort of visualize this as this sort of like freeze moment, you know, where Jesus says, "Who touched me?" as he feels the power going out of him, it says. And you sort of think, again, she's really going to be in trouble now. She's sort of taken something that wasn't being offered to her, but it was being offered to her. And one of the most beautiful moments for me about that story is when Jesus calls her daughter. So in that story, she is made well. She's made physically well. But of course, that condition would have meant her exclusion from community, from society, from socializing, from all sorts, from the temple, from all sorts of things. And he makes very public her restoration into that community. So it's not just she's well and she hasn't got to cope with that anymore, and she shuffles away quietly to sort of enjoy not putting up with it. He announces her kind of wellness, and by that she's restored, and then even more he claims her in that kind of familial term, daughter. And actually, again, that woman leaves that encounter with Jesus a different person than she was when she reached out for him. And actually, in that story, she does the reaching out, but finds that God is so receptive to that, so thrilled to be kind of encountering her, and changes her life. And I think that's like just such a wonderful kind of account of the difference even that small really interaction makes for somebody.
And I love it that it's, I think all the gospel writers put it in the middle of the story of Jairus' daughter.
That's
so
right.
Jesus is already being hurried along somewhere, and you think, Jesus has got to be too busy for this woman, surely. No, that's exactly. And of course it builds the tension, doesn't it? Because then we don't know what's happened to Jairus either, or Jairus' daughter, and then you get this interruption really of this woman. So in every way she's sort of the wrong person in the wrong place, and yet look what that means for her. And that for me speaks of God's nimbleness, I think. Jesus having this compassionate ability to respond quickly and well to something which, an opportunity that's shown up, and that sort of light-footedness, if you like, that ability to just be easy on your toes, to be able to go the way that it needs to go, I think is a beautiful aspect of God that it points to. We should stop soon, but I'm aware that the kind of question this leaves for me, I suppose, is if we're going to sort of say, well, these are some of the overarching themes of the Bible, what might we say that a broad view of all of the scriptures might tell us about the God who is revealed in them? What do you think?
Well, I mean, lots of people use the sort of formula that it's a story of creation and fall from perfection of creation and then redemption. And of course, that's not in 3 equal sections. The creation story is quite small in a way, except that God goes on with that creation. So even when we fall, God continues that work, and that invitation for restoration, for redemption, for salvation. All of those can sound like strange words, but are all about that invitation to be as close to God as God first intended us to be fully ourselves in God. To be fully alive. And so I think that's quite a nice sort of way of thinking about the overarching story. Tom Wright, you might have come across some of his Bible for Everyone books. He has this idea that the Bible's like a 5-act play, and he thinks it's an unfinished drama. So you get that sort of creation and fall, and then the story of God's people Israel, and then the story of Jesus coming. But the 5th act is the church, and that's unfinished, and we become part of that story.
We're
so
kind of invited in, sort of thing.
God's people in every age continue that story, that drama, and until all things are kind of fulfilled, and then that's the end of the play. And I like that idea, because although the Bible is finished, you know, there's an end to that book, the story very much isn't. The themes very much aren't. They're part of what we live and experience.
Yeah, yeah. I'm with you 100% on that. I think one of the things for me would be the stuff in Luke 15, where Jesus tells the three, Luke records Jesus telling of the three parables of the lost.
Yeah.
Jesus is giving in response to a question of why are you eating with tax collectors and sinners? And it's a way of saying God is a search and rescue God, a reconciling God, a God who takes the initiative, and for whom no one is too small to be missed or overlooked, you know. And for me, I think that that process of us being part of the fifth act, as you described it, is a way of saying that we are invited then to join in with this reconciling God's wishes and dreams and longings in the world. It's not that we sort of sit back and say, well, you know, I've become a Christian and so I'm going to be okay when I die. I'll just put my feet up now and wait till that happens. No, absolutely not. We're invited in. We're told to be part of the process of bringing in God's kingdom, if we know we have a sense of what it's to be like. And that for me emboldens us, because now we know more and more what God is like. We know there's a massive, it's almost like we're surfing on the biggest wave ever. And we're just invited to sit on there. And it's easy in this age of the life of the church to become anxious about what will be. But God's loving and beautiful purposes for the world will not be thwarted. And then we get that beautiful end point, like someone's given us the fast forward button or the skip button. And we get in Revelation 21 this beautiful picture of the New Jerusalem, and if you like that, a picture of how God will make things at the end of time. No more mourning or crying or pain, no injustice, no suffering. And that's the direction that we're encouraged to travel in. And I just love it. That's kind of, God gives us that invitation to say, come on, join the team. And yeah, we can do that. We can all play our small part, a little bit like the little cameo pictures of Donald Duck that we saw earlier. We can all play our little bit to be part of the big picture, you know. So we should probably stop there. There's lots more we could say, but Lindsay, thank you so much. It's been a joy to share in conversation with you. Would you pray for us, please? As we,
absolutely.
for all who will watch this video and discuss as out of it.
Loving God, we thank you for the gift of your scripture, for the stories of the way in which you call us and seek us and search for us and rescue us. We pray for any today who don't think they deserve rescuing or could possibly be rescued. And we remember the father in the story of the lost son who sees his son when he is still far off and runs down the road to meet him. And we thank you that that is the sort of God you are, that you search us and seek us however far off we are, and you run to meet us. Amen.
Amen. Lindsay, thanks so much. Have a good rest of your day, won't you? Thanks a lot.
All the best.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.